My name's Matt. I'm 43, and I live just outside Tulsa, Oklahoma. Sometimes I wonder if the universe gives you signs early on, little warnings you don't want to see. Looking back, I guess the sign for me came the day my parents told me to pack up my stuff and leave. I was 16. My sister was 17 and pregnant. They needed my room for the new family. That's what my mom called it, like I was some extra piece of furniture they had to make space for. I didn't even get angry back then. Not really. I packed my backpack, took the couple $100 I'd saved from mowing lawns, and left without saying a word. My dad didn't even look up from the TV. My mom gave me this tight, awkward smile like she was doing me a favor. And my sister? She stood in the doorway of what used to be my room, rubbing her belly, already talking about paint colors for the nursery. At 16, I told myself it wasn't personal. They just had their priorities. But deep down, even then, I knew I wasn't really a son anymore. I was the spare part that didn't fit the machine. I bounced around a lot after that. Couch surfing, working odd jobs. Never really felt like I had a home again. But I kept moving forward, because standing still felt too close to going backward. By 28, I'd saved enough to buy a small plot of land outside town. By 30, I built my own house with my own hands. Every nail, every board, mine. It wasn't big, it wasn't fancy, but it was mine. And for the first time since I was a kid, I felt like I'd carved out a little piece of this world that no one could take. Or so I thought. Because last summer, out of nowhere, my parents showed up at my doorstep with their suitcases. And they weren't visiting. They were moving in. At first, I thought it was a mistake. I opened the door expecting a quick visit, maybe even an apology after all these years. But no. My mom was already rolling one of those wheeled suitcases over the threshold before I even got a word out. My dad stood behind her, his hand on the other suitcase handle, avoiding my eyes like a guilty teenager. We didn't know where else to go, my mom said, her voice soft, rehearsed, like she'd practiced it on the drive over. Eric's place. It's too crowded now. I froze. Eric. Of course. My sister's golden boy. The child they'd rearranged my whole life for. I hadn't seen her in years, but I'd heard the stories. She'd had another baby, then another. Eric wasn't even out of high school yet when he started calling the shots in that house. And apparently now, the house was too full for my parents. So they'd come here. My house. The house I'd bled and sweat for. I stepped back, trying to process it. My mom looked around the living room like she already owned the place, making little approving noises. My dad sighed and rubbed his back, already eyeing my recliner like it had his name on it. And that's when it hit me. They hadn't come because they had no choice. They'd come because they expected this. They still thought I was that 16-year-old boy who'd pack up and leave quietly to make room for them. They thought I'd open the door, smile, and let them take over. They thought wrong. I didn't say anything at first. Just stood there, leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching them settle in like it was a given. My mom had already set her purse on the kitchen counter. My dad had kicked off his shoes and eased himself into my recliner with a grunt of satisfaction, like he'd finally reclaimed something that was always his. It was surreal. For a long moment, I wondered if I was overreacting. Maybe they really had nowhere else. Maybe they needed me. Maybe. No. That old reflex, the one that made me doubt myself, that made me want to please them even after everything, they were counting on it. That's why they hadn't called first. That's why they hadn't asked. They knew if they just showed up, I'd have a harder time saying no. But I wasn't that kid anymore. I cleared my throat. So, how long are you planning to stay? My mom smiled brightly, like I'd just invited them to a vacation home. Oh, honey, we were thinking, indefinitely. Just until we get back on our feet. My dad nodded, already flipping through channels on the TV remote. Won't be a bother. We'll stay out of your way. I looked around the house. My house. Suddenly it felt smaller, the walls closing in as their presence filled every corner. I could already picture them spreading out, making themselves at home, my quiet life swallowed whole. And in that moment, I realized they hadn't come here to stay temporarily. They'd come to take over. I stood there a little longer, watching as my parents made themselves comfortable, each small action like another nail being hammered into the walls of the life I'd built without them. My mom was unpacking groceries she must have brought from their old house, setting up spices, dry goods, even rearranging my fridge like she was taking back her old kitchen. My dad had his feet up on the coffee table, flipping between sports channels, already complaining about the satellite package. It was happening so fast. You sure you're okay with us taking your room? My mom called sweetly from the kitchen. We figured you wouldn't mind sleeping on the couch. It's just temporary, sweetie. I felt something snap inside me. A quiet, cold click. The same feeling I'd had at 16, standing in the driveway as they waved me off like an unwanted guest. Except this time, I wasn't 16. I wasn't powerless. I took a deep breath and stepped into the room. No, I said calmly. My mom paused, a jar of pickles in her hand. No, what? No, you're not taking my room. No, you're not moving in. No, you're not staying here. She stared at me like she'd never heard me speak that way. My dad turned, squinting at me over his reading glasses. Matt, don't be dramatic. We're family. Family helps each other. I almost laughed. Family helps each other. Where was that family when I was 16 and homeless? When I was crashing on friends' couches, picking up shifts at the diner after school just to eat? When I was digging holes on a construction site at 19 to save enough for the down payment on this very land? I swallowed hard, feeling the old ache rise up but pushing it back down. No, I repeated, my voice steady. You don't get to come back after 25 years and decide this is your home. It's not. You made your choice when you kicked me out. My mom's face crumpled. We were doing what we had to for your sister. For her family, I corrected. Not for me. Never for me. The silence stretched so long I could hear the clock ticking on the wall. My mom set the jar down. My dad stood up slowly. Matt, you're being selfish. That word. Selfish. It hit like a slap. For a second, I actually felt guilty. But only for a second. Then the guilt turned to something harder. No, I said again, shaking my head. For the first time in my life, I'm not being selfish. I'm protecting what I built. You're not staying here. My dad's face darkened. You'd really throw your own parents out? I looked him straight in the eye. You threw me out when I was a kid. I'm just returning the favor. My dad's jaw tightened. For a moment, I thought he might yell, like he used to when I was a kid and questioned anything. But instead, he just shook his head, that old disappointed look settling over his face, the one that always said I wasn't enough. We didn't raise you to be like this, Matt, he muttered. That line stung more than I wanted to admit. Because the truth was, they hadn't really raised me at all. They raised my sister. They raised her babies. Me? I'd been raising myself since the day they cleared out my room. My mom stepped forward, her voice trembling with forced gentleness. Matt, please. We're your parents. We're not asking for much. Just a roof over our heads. Just until we figure things out. I stared at them both, feeling the weight of decades pressing down on my chest. So many moments flashed through my mind, sitting alone at high school graduation because they were too busy with my sister's baby shower to attend. Coming home from a 16-hour shift to find a foreclosure notice on their house that I had secretly been paying for to keep them afloat. Every birthday, every holiday, every life milestone where I was background noise to their chaos. And now they were standing in my living room, asking me to erase all of that like it never happened. My voice came out quiet, steadier than I felt. No, I've given you enough second chances. This isn't your home. My dad's face twisted with anger. You're going to regret this. Maybe. Maybe I would. But in that moment, I knew regret wasn't worse than resentment. And I've been living with resentment my whole life. I'll take my chances, I said simply. For a long moment, no one moved. Then my mom wiped at her eyes, trying to summon pity one last time. You've changed, Matt. You used to be such a good boy. I smiled, not kindly. That's the thing, Mom. You liked me better when I didn't say no. She opened her mouth, but whatever words she had were lost as I walked to the front door, pulled it open, and gestured. Please leave. It took a full minute, but slowly, they gathered their things. My mom glanced around the room one last time, like she was memorizing it. My dad didn't look at me as he rolled his suitcase out the door. And just like that, they were gone. Or so I thought. I stood in the doorway for a while after they left, watching the dust settle on the gravel where their car had been parked. The house felt hollow in their absence, but not empty, more like it had taken a long exhale after holding its breath too long. I locked the door, leaned my back against it, and slid down to sit on the floor, feeling equal parts relief and guilt swirling in my chest. Relief that they were gone. Guilt for feeling relieved. I thought that was the end. But the next morning, a letter arrived. Not an email, not a text, a real letter, hand-delivered in an envelope with my mom's handwriting on it. It had been slipped under the front door while I slept. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at it for a long time before finally breaking the seal. Inside was a folded sheet of lined paper, filled with her careful cursive. The words felt rehearsed, polished, like something she'd written long before they ever came to my door. Dear Matt, I hope someday you understand why we did what we did. Everything we did was to give your sister a chance. She made mistakes, but we had to help her. You were always stronger. You didn't need us. I'm sorry if it felt like we left you behind. But we were doing what parents have to do. We thought you'd be willing to help us now because you've built such a good life. We thought you'd understand that family means sacrifice. We'll leave you alone now. But I hope you won't close the door forever. Love, Mom. I sat back in my chair, letting the letter drop to the table. There it was. The explanation. The excuse. The same story wrapped in softer words. They'd never seen me as a child who needed protecting. They saw me as the strong one, the self-sufficient one, the one they could forget, because I wouldn't break. But being the strong one doesn't mean it doesn't hurt. It just means no one stops to notice you're bleeding. I folded the letter back up, placed it in a drawer, and closed it. Not out of anger. Not out of spite. But because I already knew how the story went. And I was done rereading it. For a few weeks after the letter, there was silence. A strange, weightless kind of quiet, like the eye of a storm. I started to believe they'd finally moved on. Maybe they'd found another way. Maybe they'd realized I wasn't the same son they left behind. But then came the envelope. A thick, official-looking packet, stamped with the county seal, delivered by certified mail. I held it in my hands on the porch, heart already sinking before I even tore it open. Inside, a court summons. My parents were suing me. I read the papers twice, 3 times, trying to make sense of it. They were claiming rights to my property, arguing that my grandfather's estate had been meant for family use, that since my grandfather left them everything, and they had used it to help my sister's family, I had benefited indirectly, and therefore had no claim to the property I'd bought with my portion of the family wealth. Except, I'd never received a portion. That's when I saw it. Attached in the packet was a copy of my grandfather's original will, except it wasn't the copy I'd seen as a teenager, back when I believed there was nothing left for me. This copy had my name on it. In the original will, my grandfather had left me half of everything. But my parents, they'd never told me. They'd taken it, spent it, diverted it into my sister's life, paying off her debts, buying her a house, covering expenses while I scraped by, thinking I'd been left out. And now they had the audacity to come for the house I built with my own hands. I sat down on the porch steps, the weight of it crashing over me. All those years I thought I'd been surviving on nothing, when in reality, they'd stolen what was mine. It wasn't just betrayal. It wasn't just neglect. It was theft. And now they wanted more. But the thing was, they didn't know me anymore. They didn't know how many nights I'd spent researching, learning, filing documents, preparing for this kind of fight without even knowing it would come. I folded the papers, stood up, and walked inside. If they wanted a battle, they were about to find out I'd been ready for war a long time ago. The first hearing was 2 months later. I remember sitting in the courthouse in downtown Tulsa, watching my parents shuffle in with their lawyer, a slick guy in an expensive suit who looked like he'd never lost a case. My mother's eyes darted around the room, but she didn't meet mine. My dad kept his gaze fixed on the floor. I wasn't alone. I had a lawyer too, Margaret, a no-nonsense woman who'd grown up in a family not unlike mine. When I'd first explained the situation, she'd leaned back in her chair, folded her arms, and simply said, "Oh, we're gonna crush them." And from the very first moment, she meant it. Their lawyer opened with a heartfelt speech about family obligation, sacrifice, and ungrateful children who don't understand the weight their parents carried. He painted me as selfish, cold, distant, a son who'd turned his back on the people who gave him life. Margaret didn't even blink. When it was our turn, she stood up and, in a calm, deadly voice, started laying out the paper trail. Bank records, wire transfers, property deeds. The original will with my name clearly printed next to half the estate. The financial drain of my inheritance funneled, year after year, into my sister's mounting debts. Receipts, emails, letters, every missing piece accounted for. The courtroom felt smaller with every page she handed to the judge. My mother shifted uncomfortably. My dad wiped sweat from his forehead. Their lawyer kept trying to object, but the judge waved him off each time. It wasn't a quick fight. It took months. More hearings. More documents. But every time they tried to twist the story, Margaret tightened the noose with facts. The day the judgment was handed down, I stood outside the courthouse as the sun set, holding the final order in my hands. The ruling was clear. The court awarded me not only my rightful share of the original estate, but damages for the misappropriation of funds. The house I built was declared untouchable, mine, free, and clear. They'd lost. And in losing, they lost me too. The phone call started the next day. First, it was my mother. She left a message, her voice trembling, a mix of sadness and indignation. "Matt, how could you? After everything we did for you. You didn't have to make it public. You didn't have to shame us." Then my father, his tone clipped and bitter. "Hope you're proud of yourself. You tore this family apart." Then my sister. "I can't believe you do this to Mom and Dad. You knew they were just trying to help me." I didn't answer any of them. I didn't call back. I didn't owe them explanations. For years I'd carried the weight of their choices, their neglect, their betrayal. For years I'd convinced myself it wasn't so bad, that they meant well, that family was complicated. But standing in that courtroom, watching their lies crumble, something inside me had finally snapped into place. This wasn't my guilt to carry. This wasn't my burden to fix. They built this house of cards. And when it collapsed, they wanted me to hold the blame. But I wasn't picking up the pieces anymore. I spent that week cleaning the house, room by room, almost ritualistically. Every drawer organized. Every cabinet wiped down. I painted the living room walls the deep shade of green I'd always wanted but never made time for. I planted new flowers along the walkway. It wasn't about the house, really. It was about claiming something. About saying, in my quiet way, this is mine. One afternoon, I stood on the porch, sipping coffee, watching the sun set over the hills. The phone buzzed again. Another voicemail. I didn't listen. I deleted it. For the first time in my life, the silence wasn't lonely. It was peace. It had been 3 quiet months since the court ruling. I'd almost convinced myself the chapter was closed, that I'd heard the last of them. But then, one late afternoon, their car rolled up the driveway again. I watched from the living room window, my coffee growing cold in my hands. My parents stepped out slowly, looking smaller, worn down. My mother's hair was streaked with more gray than I remembered. My father walked stiffly, as if each step cost him something. For a fleeting second, the old instinct flared, the one that made me want to go to them, to open the door, to ask if they were okay. But I stayed still. They didn't come up to the door. They stayed by the car, their posture uncertain. My mother was holding a box. After a moment's hesitation, she carried it halfway up the steps, set it down gently, and pressed her hands against the lid as if sealing it with some unspoken intention. She didn't knock. Neither did my father. They got back in the car, pulled out of the driveway, and disappeared down the road without once looking back. I waited until their taillights vanished before stepping outside. The box was small, light. I carried it into the kitchen and set it on the table. Slowly, I lifted the lid. Inside, wrapped in yellowed tissue paper, were fragments of a life I'd half forgotten. A baby photo of me in a faded blue onesie. My high school diploma, the corners curled. A third-place ribbon from a middle school science fair. An old toy truck, its paint chipped, one wheel missing. And on top of it all, a folded sheet of lined paper, my mother's careful handwriting filling the page. Matt, we know we can't undo the past. We know we made choices that hurt you. We thought we were doing what was right at the time. Maybe we were wrong. Maybe we didn't see you clearly. We're sorry. If this box means anything to you, keep it. If not, we understand. We hope, someday, you can forgive us. No signatures. No promises. No pleas. Just those words. I read it twice, then folded the note carefully and placed it back inside. I closed the lid and rested my hands on it for a long, quiet moment. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt done. Weeks passed after they left the box. I never heard from them again. No calls. No letters. Just silence. Sometimes I wondered if they finally understood, or if they simply gave up. But I didn't dwell on it. There was something freeing about that quiet. About not waiting for the next knock at the door. About knowing the story wasn't unfinished. It was just done. I found myself standing outside more often, watching the sun move across the sky, planting new flowers along the fence line, mending the old swing in the backyard. Little acts of care for a place that had always been mine, even before I'd allowed myself to believe it. One evening, as the lights softened into gold, I stood at the edge of my land, looking out over the hills. The breeze carried the scent of honeysuckle, and for the first time in as long as I could remember, my chest felt light. I thought about everything that had brought me here. About the 16-year-old boy standing in a driveway with a backpack and nowhere to go. About the man I'd become, one who learned, piece by piece, to build a life no one could take. And as the wind moved through the grass, I realized something. Forgiveness didn't have to mean inviting them back in. Sometimes forgiveness was simply laying down the weight, letting it be theirs to carry, and walking forward, lighter for it. I turned back toward the house, the porch light flickering on as dusk settled. My home, my life,